All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this very important webinar on how to test, report, and monitor WCAG and ADA compliance. We're very excited to have you with us. Ensuring accessibility and inclusivity is not just a regulatory requirement, but a moral imperative. Today, we will delve into the intricacies of the WCAG, ADA, and Section 508 and explore practical steps to achieving compliance. I'm Sugandha, Product Marketing Manager at BrowserStack, and your host and moderator for today's session. Joining me are two experts in the field of accessibility. First, we have Jared Smith. Jared is the Executive Director at WebAIM and a seasoned accessibility consultant. Jared, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello and welcome everyone. I appreciate the invitation to be here today. As was mentioned, I'm Jared Smith from WebAIM, which is the Web Accessibility in Mind project. We're a nonprofit web accessibility consultancy based at Utah State University, and we do web accessibility. Our website, webaim.org, has a lot of information and resources. We provide training and technical assistance, website testing, and all sorts of different things around our mission of empowering people with disabilities by helping organizations and individuals make the web more accessible to them. And WebAIM is just about to celebrate our 25-year anniversary this fall, and we're excited for that. We've been in this space for a very long time, and I appreciate the invitation to be here today and share a little bit about accessibility.
Great. Thank you so much for being here, Jared. Our second speaker is Apurv. Apurv is a product leader at BrowserStack who has been instrumental in developing our accessibility testing suite. Apurv, would you like to give a small intro?
Yeah, sure. Hey, folks, really excited to be here. Thank you for joining us, Jared, and thank you so much, Sugandha. So I'm working as the group PM on our web accessibility products. And yeah, really excited to kind of talk to you guys about WCAG compliance, helping folks make their digital properties accessible, and yeah, hopefully kind of showing you folks also the products that we have to help you become WCAG compliant.
Great. Thank you, Apurv. Glad to have you both in the webinar. Now, before we begin, here are a few housekeeping items. The session will run for an hour, including 15 minutes reserved for Q&A at the end. This session will be recorded and the recording will be made available to all participants. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the Zoom Q&A box. We'll address them during the Q&A session at the end. Now, without further ado, let's jump into the agenda. Our session today is structured to give you a comprehensive understanding of ADA Section 508 and WCAG guidelines. We'll also talk about common challenges in accessibility and the tools that can help streamline your compliance efforts. We'll also have a live demo and a Q&A session, so please feel free to submit your questions as we go along. We have a lot of valuable information to cover, so let's get started. To kick things off, we'll dive into the basics. Jared will provide us with an overview of ADA and Section 508 compliance. Over to you, Jared.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about the law. This is not always the most fun topic to address, but it is really important, very critical for accessibility efforts. First, we have the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. The ADA was first passed in 1990. It's been around for a very long time. In short, it prohibits discrimination based on disability. The ADA does not specifically mention the web. It does not mention the internet. It really kind of predates those. But we'll talk about how that is and has changed in recent years in just a little bit. So the ADA applies to public and to private sectors. Again, the intent is to ensure equal access to services, facilities, digital content, all of those things. It's to prohibit discrimination, but it does predate the web. There's also Section 508. Now, the Section 508 is part of the Rehabilitation Act. It's U.S. federal law. It applies to U.S. federal agencies, and it mandates that all electronic and information technology, or E&IT or EIT, sometimes abbreviated that, must be accessible to people with disabilities. Because it applies to federal agencies, it tends to have a broader scope, right? It's going to apply to contractors. It will apply to those entities that want to provide business for or sell products to the federal government. The federal government also requires compliance with Section 508 very often when it provides federal funding. So maybe higher ed institutions or other local governmental entities that are not U.S. federal agencies may still be required to meet the Section 508 technical requirements for accessibility, even though they are not federal agencies, but because they receive federal funding, and there are often requirements with that federal funding to comply with Section 508. Now, when it comes to the technical standards, this is where things get a little interesting. As I mentioned, the ADA predates the web, has not historically referenced specifically any technical standard for digital accessibility. That's put us in kind of an interesting, difficult place where we have a law that prohibits discrimination, and we know that an inaccessible website can be considered discriminatory, but we've not yet had technical standards for that to measure that discrimination. That has recently changed. In just a few months ago, there was a new rulemaking process that has now defined the web content accessibility guidelines, and I'll be spending more time on these guidelines in just a minute. I'll also say WCAG, WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So if I say WCAG, that's what I'm referring to. If I had to say Web Content Accessibility Guidelines every time, we'd need an extra 30 minutes for this webinar. But the WCAG has different versions, and the technical standard for the ADA is now WCAG 2.1, which is a fairly recent version, and A and AA. And I'll define what those levels mean, A and AA, in just a minute. So that's required for public entities with an enforcement date of 2026, or if you're a smaller public entity, by 2027. So we now have technical standards for the ADA, or at least we will have within a couple years. Under Section 508, the technical standards are WCAG 2.0, A and AA. So this is an older version of the guidelines. The current version is actually 2.2, but Section 508 is a bit older, tends to lag a bit behind. Its requirements are WCAG 2.0, A and AA. Now, a best practice, if you want to ensure that your website is hopefully pretty accessible and not discriminatory, we recommend WCAG 2.2, A and AA, plus any relevant AAA requirements. And again, I'll define those a bit better in just a moment. Now, what if you don't meet these technical requirements? Well, there is risk of lawsuits, fines, legal penalties, even under the ADA, and even if you are not a public entity. In other words, if you are a private entity in America and your website is inaccessible, you could still be sued for discrimination, even though there aren't technical standards defined in the law. Now, the threshold for most of those lawsuits has been the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, A and AA, which are now the technical standards that are defined. So we have some precedents where essentially the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines is really where it's at, and has been a de facto standard for the ADA for quite some time. And now, at least in a couple of years, will be the enforceable technical standard under that law. And there's also potential for brand reputation damage. You know, if your website is discriminatory, it's not accessible to people with disabilities, that's not a good look for businesses. Under the ADA, there can also be civil penalties, generally not enforced, but there are mechanisms for that. Under Section 508, the federal government needs to purchase the most accessible product, or things that meet Section 508 or the most accessible alternative. So that can result in a loss of federal contracts, potentially legal action, because of the implications of those procurement processes. Could also result in loss of federal funding in certain circumstances. So that's a brief overview of the law. There's also Section 504 that requires the web content accessibility guidelines for healthcare settings. States also tend to have accessibility laws, at least many of them do. There are also international laws. Almost all of these laws tend to reference the web content accessibility guidelines as their technical standard. So that's what we need to be looking at.
Great. Thank you, Jared, for that comprehensive overview. As Jared earlier mentioned, he will now shed more light into the core principles of WCAG guidelines and how they tie into ADA.
Okay, so yeah, I've already kind of introduced the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. Let's get into a little more detail as to what these are and what they mean. As I mentioned, these are the most referenced set of standards. They are the technical standard in most laws, certainly laws within the United States, but also international laws. These guidelines, excuse me, are based on 4 foundational principles: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. These are good principles to think about when it comes to accessibility. If you want to ensure that your content, your web applications are accessible, they need to be perceivable. In other words, the user needs to be able to perceive the content and the functionality in a way that they can with the senses that they have available, regardless of disability. If your content's not perceivable, it doesn't matter what else it is. It's going to be inaccessible to that user. Once you can perceive content, you want to be able to use it and navigate and operate within that. So that's our operable principle. You need to be able to actually function and use that content. It needs to be understandable. It needs to make sense in order to be accessible. And then robust, it needs to work in the technologies that the end user is using, including assistive technologies for users with disabilities. So that's the foundational level of these guidelines, or those 4 principles. Within each of those 4 principles are guidelines, and guidelines are very high-level statements about accessibility. There are things like provide alternatives for non-text content. So that would require, for instance, alternative text for images. There are things like, make media accessible to someone that cannot perceive that media using, for instance, hearing. That would require captions. A guideline is also, one of them is make things keyboard accessible, right? Very high level guidelines. Within guidelines are success criteria. These success criteria are individual measurable tests for accessibility. And that's really where compliance or conformance with these guidelines is measured, is at the success criteria level. Well, we also want to ensure that, beyond just these technical tests for accessibility, we want to make sure that things actually work for users with disabilities. We want to consider different disability types and the assistive technologies that they might be using. So, those with visual disabilities, blindness, low vision, also color blindness is part of that, auditory disabilities, so deafness and hard of hearing, motor disabilities, maybe users that have difficulty using a mouse or a keyboard, cognitive and learning disabilities, where content may be more difficult to understand, where users might be distracted and things like that, based on the type of content that they're engaging with. So we want to think about the technical standards, but also think about them across disability types. Each success criterion within WCAG is assigned a level, A, AA, or AAA. Single A success criteria, those are kind of foundational things. If you don't meet single A success criteria, you almost certainly are going to be excluding users with disabilities or causing additional frustration or difficulty or time in engaging with that content. AA success criteria, if you don't meet those, again, it may cause frustration or difficulty, additional impact on users with disabilities. And then AAA are more kind of enhancements to accessibility, generally disability specific. They may not be relevant to certain types of content. This is why the legal requirements and what our recommendation is generally A and AA, but also look at some of those AAA success criteria. If you can meet them, if it's reasonable and applicable and can make your content more accessible, you would want to look at those AAA. It was shared in chat, a checklist that WebAIM has created. The guidelines themselves are fairly academic and a bit heavy and dense, so sometimes a little difficult to understand. So we've taken those guidelines and really simplified them and created this checklist that we would encourage you to use as a reference to better understand what these accessibility guidelines are and how you implement and how you measure accessibility to those guidelines.
Great, great. Thank you so much, Jared, for that overview as well as for sharing this wonderful resource. It's in the chat box, so please everyone make use of it. Now, let's move on to the challenges segment. But before we move on there, I'd like to hear from the audience. We want to know what are the biggest challenges your organization face in achieving accessibility compliance. Please respond to the poll that's flashing on your screen. We will give 30 seconds maybe for everybody to respond. Great. Thank you everyone for your responses. Jared, we've just gone over the essentials of ADA and Section 508 and how they relate to WCAG, right? Now, can you share some insights into the common challenges that teams face when they're trying to make their apps and websites accessible?
Sure. There obviously are challenges to accessibility, or folks probably wouldn't be on the webinar today, right? This can be difficult. It can be difficult to understand what accessibility is and what it means. It can be difficult to implement it within an organization because it is a fairly complex, inherently technical, considerations to make things accessible. We, however, find that while there are some of those technical barriers to implementing accessibility, a lot of the challenges, sometimes the bigger challenges, are organizational challenges. So let's talk about some of those. Primarily, there may be a lack of leadership support, approval, resources, just a commitment to accessibility that messages that this is important. And very often that comes from a lack of understanding of the impact of accessibility, not only on end users, but on bottom lines, on reputation, on revenue. And so that leadership support is really important. And in absence of it, sometimes there can be grassroots efforts that do some good things. But to be really effective, that leadership support needs to be there. Along with that, accessibility is often not prioritized or timelined, right? There aren't real measurable requirements for accessibility. Maybe there aren't, even bug reports that are categorized for accessibility, and those may not be prioritized or given specific timelines for accessibility implementation. It just tends to sometimes be deprioritized, often for newer innovation and new functionality and features and design updates and things like that. When accessibility can be integrated into those as opposed to being treated as a separate thing, often that works best. In other words, we're going to do a new design and we're going to include accessibility. We're going to look at functional and maybe security improvements, but we're also going to consider accessibility as part of those. Can make that easier. There's also the complexity and ambiguity of the guidelines themselves. They can be a little difficult to understand. Now, most of the foundational issues that we see on the web are pretty easy to understand. They're very easy to test. We conduct an annual analysis every year at WebAIM of the top 1 million homepages. There's a report published on the WebAIM site. You can look for WebAIM million if you'd like to check that out. We find that the most common issues are pretty easy to test. They're pretty easy to understand within the guidelines. But out here on the fringes, there can be some complexity and kind of ambiguity as to how the web content guidelines apply. Is this a failure or not? And so understanding that sometimes takes some effort and can be a challenge. A lot of that comes back to expertise and training. People ask us how expensive accessibility is to implement. We say it's always going to be a function of your training and understanding, right? Your knowledge about accessibility. So, in prioritizing as an organization, building that expertise, building those training resources across your organization is going to be very helpful. And then inadequate testing tools and remediation. So you need to not only be able to know how to address accessibility issues, but know how to identify those accessibility issues. How can you find them and then have processes to remediate those? So we often see with the clients that we worked with these cycles of, like, you know, they go through a remediation sprint, right? And it fits lots of accessibility issues that they found. But then over time, because they haven't looked at some of these other leadership supports and priorities and maybe a lack of understanding of the guidelines and maybe inadequate testing, things become broken, right? They update, they change things and becomes broken. And then maybe they test again and find additional issues. And then they go back to this remediation cycle. And sometimes clients really get into these cycles of just not really feeling like they're making progress with accessibility because they're introducing new accessibility defects as quickly or sometimes faster than they can be remediated. And so thinking about some of these challenges, and we'll talk in a minute about how we can address some of these challenges, can help address some of those cycles that we very often see. And they can be addressed by having better leadership, prioritizing accessibility, better understanding WCAG, and that comes through expertise and good training, and then having good tools that can help identify issues along the way. So let's maybe talk about some of the existing solutions for testing tools now.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you for sharing these insights, Jared. Jared has touched on some very key challenges, but I'd also like to get Apoor's perspective, especially considering his experience with BrowserStack's accessibility product. So Apoor, can you highlight some key challenges that companies face with accessibility testing?
Yeah, I think, yeah. So yeah, I think there are a multitude of issues that we see when we go in on our customer conversations. So there are 6 of them broadly, and I'll touch upon each of them. I think the first one is a lot of the tools that are available, just because I think there has not been the same level of investment that is necessary. Say, for instance, that was there for, say, security tools or other such testing tools. We've not seen that same level of investment in accessibility testing. And so often a lot of those tools might end up being slow or inefficient. Often, for instance, pre-existing static analyzers require you to scan single pages at a time. And then if you have to scan a massive digital property, you'll have to sit and collate all those different scans and then deduplicate. And that requires a lot of manual effort. So a lot of the current tooling, we often hear customers say that it is slow, inefficient. I think the second aspect is accessibility testing. To ensure that you're comprehensively testing requires you to use a wide variety of tools. And then as an organization, you have to ensure that you evaluate a wide variety of tools. You have to then go ahead and procure and then even maintain all of these different tools. So there's a lot of juggling to be done across tools. Lack of accessibility expertise. It is a space that's been around for a while, but I think folks are now kind of paying more attention and looking into it more deeply. And so there is a learning curve associated with getting a grasp on how to build accessible digital properties. Apart from that, I think a lot of tooling, there tends to be a very tedious setup process that goes into getting these tools up and running. Maintenance is also problematic. And lastly, I think a problem that a lot of organizations face is that, again, to ensure you're comprehensive and you're testing for all the devices that potentially impaired users or the broader population is using, you have to ensure that you do your testing across all those device combinations as well. So I think these are broadly some of the themes that we've seen in our customer conversations. Yep.
Yep. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Apoor and Jared, for shedding light on the challenges that organizations face. As Jared mentioned, understanding these obstacles is the first step towards overcoming them. Now, before we dive into the strategies that can help with accessibility testing, I have another quick poll for the audience. We want to know if you're currently using any tools or solutions for accessibility testing. Please respond to the poll. We'll give 30 seconds for everybody to respond. All right. Thank you for responding, everyone. Now, as we move into the most crucial part of our discussion today, right, let's focus on the practical steps for building accessible web and mobile products. That is where theory meets practice and where we can really make an impact. Jared, could you guide us through the key steps and best practices that teams should adopt?
Yeah, sure. I think this roadmap, maybe as we might call it, a roadmap to ADA and WCAG compliance, addresses many of the challenges that we already talked about before. You'll note that these are not like technical things. You might first think, how do I build an accessible web or mobile product? And you might immediately go to like technical things, right? Alt text and form labels and ARIA and things like that. And that's technically how you do it, but that's not going to happen, at least not going to happen well, if you haven't thought broader about accessibility. So, one aspect of this roadmap is an accessibility policy. That's going to really message and define what the leadership commitment is to accessibility, what your organizational commitment is to accessibility, and also the resources that are going to be made available to support that accessibility. Should really focus on inclusiveness, on the user experience. That policy should define the web content accessibility guidelines as the measure. And we recommend 2.2 A and AA. You might align that to the ADA, which is WCAG 2.1, but then there are some newer things in 2.2 that might be missed. So we recommend a broad policy about accessibility that really messages that commitment of your organization to making this happen. Now, beyond the policy, it's also helpful to have an implementation and communication plan or plans. This defines how that accessibility is going to happen. Not only that it will, but how it's going to happen. It defines key personnel, those that are responsible for implementing that accessibility, for measuring it, defines the budget and resources that are going to be made available. There should probably be a training plan as part of this as well. Again, the cost of accessibility is going to be a function of your training and understanding of it. So having a training plan is going to be really important and helpful to being successful. Also, an assessment plan. How are you going to test for accessibility? To what standards will you test? What tools might be used for accessibility testing? Timelines for implementing all of this, right? When are we going to meet certain levels of accessibility? And I think that needs to be reasonable. It's okay for that to be measured over a period of time. Now, for those entities that are covered by the ADA, there's a timeline already now defined for you, right? We have less than 2 years, or maybe if you're a very small entity, less than 3 years before the ADA is going to require these levels of technical accessibility. So you need to have measures, timelines before then, right? Maybe measured implementation. Maybe you start with level A, right? And start with that, or maybe even a subset of level A. Get to that point, right? Basics, alt text, form labels, document language, things like that. Keyboard accessibility, and then you enhance that over time with that ultimate goal of being fully AA, A and AA conformant. Testing is going to be important, not only having that testing plan, but actually doing the testing, right? Having good tools to get a measure of where you're at when it comes to accessibility, where you're falling short, and then that can help you know where you're at. Get a baseline, and then define what you need to do to move forward. Now, that accessibility audit should extend beyond just automated tools. If you look at the guidelines, there are many aspects of compliance with the guidelines that cannot be measured with automated tools. Manual testing is absolutely vital to ensuring full compliance. Now, we know there is an alignment of automated test result data with manual test results. At WebAIM, we do both, right? So we know that there is, in other words, if a website has lots of automatically detectable issues, there tends to be a lot of manually detectable issues as well. It's not very often where you'd have 0 automatically detectable errors, and lots of other errors, right? There tends to be an alignment there. So that automated testing is very, very helpful, but you should not rely on it exclusively. To maybe put it another way, automated tools cannot tell you if your site is WCAG conformant. You have to do manual testing. So consider that in your testing plan and your accessibility audits. Once you identify those issues, you need to be able to remediate them. So having a plan with timelines and prioritizing certain types of issues, getting a measure of impact of those issues so you can prioritize based on impact can be really helpful. And then doing this over and over again, regularly testing, regularly remediating, having mechanisms for end users to maybe message and communicate if they identify accessibility barriers in your products or website can be helpful as well. So all of these put together, I think, forms a good roadmap. We have on the WebAIM site what we call a strategic accessibility framework. Takes these things and breaks it down into more distinct measurable things. If that might be helpful to you, it might be something that you could look at to help kind of help you roadmap your way to good accessibility in the future.
Great, great. Thank you, Jared, for sharing these insights. This roadmap that you mentioned provides a solid foundation for teams who are looking to improve their accessibility efforts. Now, building on your last point, Jared, about the need to continuously test for accessibility and address issues as they arise, Apoorv, can you share the role and in the importance of accessibility testing tools in achieving compliance?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I think having the right accessibility testing tools is very critical nowadays because of the size and the volume of digital properties and the amount of and some of these complexities just as you're starting out, because there, like I mentioned, there is a learning curve to for organizations to become comfortable with becoming accessible. I think broadly there are two buckets of tools that we've seen. One is the set of tools that help you automatically detect issues. The underlying tech goes through a web page and automatically detects issues from the rendered front end. So tools like those are like, you have static analyzers, which are browser extensions that are often found. There are also assisted testing tools that will guide you through testing and will flag issues and then require your inputs to kind of confirm or validate those kind of issues. Apart from that, I think it's also critical to have good monitoring in place. Firstly, when you get started in your 0 to 1 journey, it helps you establish a baseline and then helps you kind of keep track of as you're progressing, how you're progressing, and if you're heading in the right direction. And so a website scanner is a great tool for that, or even embedding accessibility testing into your pre-existing, say, functional test suite. So I think those are kind of the 4 ways in which you can have automatic issue detection happen. And then it's equally important to look at manual testing. It's something that should not be ignored, even though it might seem daunting at first. This is equally important. And here, I think 2 aspects. One is a testing checklist, like the one Jared had shared from WebAIM. So you can use a lot of these checklists that are available out there that help you understand the nitty-gritties and what are the different ways in which you can test different components like morals, forms, etc. And lastly, I think what's also very critical is to use assistive technology, because ultimately these are the tools that often impaired users use, and it's very valuable to understand what their end user experience is. So once you're able to understand that, only then you'll be able to fix the potential barriers that they face as they're trying to use your digital property. So yeah, I think those are the broad buckets of accessibility tools that are out there. Yeah.
And we have the next slide. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, so I think I think now the next thing I'd love to talk about is how BrowserStack and its product suite can help you in terms of all those different aspects that I mentioned in terms of having automatic and manual issue detection. So one of the key things that we have is a website scanner. So it allows you to scan up to 10,000 pages in one go. And like I mentioned, you'll be able to very quickly get a baseline understand the common issues across pages, across components, and then be able to monitor the trends over time. We also offer automated tests. So through our BrowserStack SDK, if you have any pre-existing functional test suite, as soon as you install the SDK with just a single line of code, you'll be able to activate accessibility testing in your test suite entirely without having to make any further code changes. So this is a very powerful capability that we offer. We also offer something which really sets us apart is access to assistive technology. Because BrowserStack is fundamentally has a lot of infrastructure and has been its forte over the last 10 plus years, we offer access to a wide variety of screen readers, VoiceOver on Mac on iOS, and then NVDA on Windows, and then TalkBack on Android. All of these are kind of instantly available to you on real devices, and you can understand the end user experience. Apart from that, I think a couple of other innovations that we've had is we've also had an automatic workflow analyzer. So this sits inside our Chrome browser extension. I'll be covering this in a bit as well. So you can start the scanner and then naturally kind of traverse through your website, and we'll keep looking for issues along the way and create a consolidated report. Apart from all of this, I think it's equally important to have a single location, a one-stop solution where all of your reports and dashboards sit. So in our central reporting dashboard, all the reports from all those different testing methods that I mentioned are easily available. So you can access these reports at any time, share them with other team members, and be able to very effectively collaborate. And I think the last thing, which is a product that recently went GA, is our app accessibility product. This is a unique, again, a unique offering because there are not a lot of other solutions out there that offer app accessibility testing in the first place, and then offer it in the way we do, which is very seamless. And I'll be covering more of that as we go into the demo. Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Apoor. Now that we've covered the theory, we'll see the tools in action. So Apoor will now take us through a live demo showing how BrowserStack's accessibility testing suite can streamline your testing process and help you achieve compliance more efficiently. Right, Apoor?
Yeah, thank you. Just a moment. Great. Are folks able to see my screen? Great. All right, let's get started. So yeah, I think first to start off with, what we'll do is I'll go over our web accessibility offering. And then after that, I'll cover our app accessibility offering as well. When we talk about our web accessibility offering, I think some of the key components that we have is the first one is our website scanner. So that allows you to scan and monitor your entire website. So you can scan up to 10,000 pages, like I mentioned, and then even set them up on a recurring basis. Apart from this, for manual testing, we have a wide variety of tools that go all the way from left to right, as you see here. On the leftmost, you have completely automatic issue detection within a workflow analyzer. Then assisted tests have semi-automatic issue detection. And then screen readers allow you give access to infrastructure and real devices so you can do manual testing. And then lastly, we also offer automated tests to help you embed accessibility testing into your functional test suite. Great. So I think I'll get started with our website scanner. So what I'll do is I'll just briefly show you what that process is like. So just a moment. Right. Actually, just a moment. Go ahead. So I've kickstarted the process of creating a new scan. And as a part of this process, I think the first step is to be able to identify the pages that you would like to scan. So we offer the ability to put in your sitemap or put in your URL, and then we're going to go ahead and grab the sitemap for you, or you can even upload an XML version of your sitemap. So just to kind of showcase how this works, I'm just going to plug in browserstack.com and hit add sitemap. So yeah, this pulled up the 5,600 pages across the BrowserStack public website. And I'm just going to select a couple of these. Just a moment. Yep, so I've got 18 pages selected, and I can go up to 10,000. So I'm just going to go ahead with 18 for the purpose of this demo. Let's go ahead. So once this is done, you have the ability to set these on a recurring basis. So you can set these to be monthly, weekly, daily. So whatever works best for your organization in terms of, you can also align this well with how your release cycles happen. You can use this as a regression suite almost, or even as a smoke testing suite, if you would like to have this daily, etc. Apart from setting them up to run on a recurring basis, you also have the ability to modify a variety of accessibility related settings. You can also choose the WCAG version that you want to target. So we offer WCAG 2.2 on the web side of things, and then this goes all the way from single A to AAA. We also, two unique capabilities that we offer is we offer you the ability to do this sort of extensive testing within your pre-prod environments as well, your staging pre-prod environments. So you can go ahead and even test any such environments, even your local host environments. Apart from that, you also have the ability to test pages which might be behind a login wall. So you can kind of choose form or basic authentication and then give those details. And then a couple of other settings to some advanced scans wherein we're able to find more issues from our proprietary rule engine. And then apart from that, we also have the ability to include needs review or best practice issues. Yeah, and then that's it. As soon as you're done with that, you can just go ahead and, so I'm just going to go ahead and select 2.2a and hit create. Great. So this should be running and should come back pretty soon. What I'll do is I'll show you a report that we already have that we run in the past across the BrowserStack domain. So this has run across hundreds of pages over here, thousands of pages actually. So this is a massive report that we have that's run across the BrowserStack website in the past, and you'll be able to see the various issues here in the sample report that we have, along with, you'll actually be able to deep dive into all of these, see a breakdown of the issues by severity, breakdown of issues by components. Apart from that, categorization of the various issues, and then also the various pages that are affected. Apart from this, you can kind of deep dive into individual issues. The issues are also organized by the WCAG guidelines as well. Yeah, and you also will be able to see the scan log. So for across all the different pages, you'll be able to kind of deep dive into any individual page. So yeah, coming back to homepage. So that was our website scanner capability. Now I'll quickly go over into our workflow analyzer for manual testing, followed by screen readers and our automated tests. Right. So here we have a demo website to just showcase our browser extension, and specifically the workflow analyzer within it, which is essentially a static analyzer. Right. I'm going to go ahead and just a moment. Right. So I'm just going to go ahead and click started on full page scan. So this is going to kick off the scan. So it's able to grab and find 61 issues on this sample website. And now what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and interact with this page. So as I add to cart, so I'm just going to add a couple of more elements. Just a moment. And lastly, let me go ahead and head to our sign-in page. Just a moment. Yep. So as you saw, what it was doing is it was going ahead and scanning as I went through different page states and creating a combined report across all of these different touch points that I went through. So all of those issues are available here in one consolidated report. And let me go ahead and just stop this. Just a moment. So for these issues, you'll see that another interesting thing is that we collate a lot of these issues all the similar kind of looking components are collated together. So you'll be able to see this very easily. So if I was to go ahead and hit highlight and go back to that page. Just a moment. Let me see if that's, yeah. So I think that's an issue that's happening on the right side here. So all of the common issues will be visible in this manner. Yeah, so I think that's everything from the workflow analyzer perspective. I'll now head into our screen reader capability. So just a moment. Great. So yeah, so far we've covered everything in terms of our website scanner that allows you to kind of bulk scanning and monitoring, a workflow analyzer that helps you kind of test through your user workflows. And then we also have, like I mentioned, access to real screen readers. So just a moment. Yep. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and kick off a session here. In just a moment, the website's just loading. Yep. I'll then get our screen reader started.
Voiceover utility. Safari, vendors, Apple, unchecked, Samsung, unchecked, checkbox, Google, unchecked, checkbox, OnePlus, unchecked, checkbox. You are currently on a checkbox. To select or deselect this checkbox, voiceover off.
Great. So like you saw, you have the ability to turn on the screen reader. There are some settings that are also configurable that show up at the beginning. And yeah, so you can actually use one of these real devices and truly understand the experience of an impaired user and really get to know their experience and work on improving those aspects of your website. Yeah, I think apart from that, we also offer automated tests. All right, let me jump into that. Just a moment. Great. So yeah, for our automated tests, we have access to, we provide our accessibility automation across 20 plus frameworks. So across a lot of the popular frameworks out there like TestNG, JUnit, Cypress, Playwright, WebDriver.io. So we have the ability to integrate directly with a single line of code using any of these testing frameworks, as long as you have a pre-existing test suite. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just show you kind of what the instructions are for something like this. So just for Mocha, for instance, it's just a simple npm install. You go ahead and install the SDK. Once you do that, once you install the SDK, our SDK creates a configuration file, which is a BrowserStack YML file. And the only change you have to make at this point is just set the accessibility flag to true. Once you do that, I think we take care of all the heavy lifting beyond that. We'll be able to run accessibility tests throughout all of your pre-existing workflows, all of the automation scripts that you have, and we'll be able to detect all of those accessibility issues within those workflows. Let me show you what one of those reports looks like. Just a moment. Yeah, so this is a test I ran around 30 minutes back. So across 2 test cases I ran. So you can look into issues. And sorry, before I go into the test, I'll cover the overview section. So you'll be able to see all the issues here broken down by severity. You'll be able to see the trend of the issues over time across past builds. You'll also get an accessibility health summary. So this indicates if any of the test cases passed or failed. In this case, all of them had failed because accessibility issues were found. Similar to the other views you saw inside the website scanner, for instance, you can see a breakdown of issues by components, also by category here as well. Now, another unique aspect is that we've ran this across 2 test cases, but you'll see that the number of issues actually if you see, it's far less. So the unique thing that we're doing is we're actually deduplicating the issues. If there were any issues across 2 pages which were very similar in nature, we have deduplicated them, and we're only showing the unique set of 76 issues, and all of those unique set of issues are available here. Great. I think that's everything on the automation front. And then lastly, let me jump into app accessibility testing. So for app accessibility testing, we offer a app workflow scanner. And now the really nice thing about this is that you don't have to do any sort of setup, procure any device, plug it in, and then figure out how to get a mobile analyzer up and running, mobile app analyzer. We take care of that entire process end to end. So I'm just going to select a device. Just a moment. So I'll just go ahead and show the sample app. Moment. So we've spun up and gotten a Samsung S24 device. You have the ability to change the WCAG version. I'm going to select AAA. I'm going to go ahead and save settings. Just a moment. Go ahead and start the scan. Great. I think this has gone ahead and scanned actually the underlying operating system itself. So once you do select the sample app, for instance, you'll be able to kind of do a similar analysis on a given app as well. This is kind of the interface you'll see once you kind of do a scan. It'll be able to show you the different types of issues that are there. You can deep dive into any of these specific issues as well. So I'll just go ahead and yeah. So these are the different issues that are available within our app accessibility product. I'm going to go ahead and stop this scan for now. Just a moment. Let me just show you a previous scan I had done on the Wikipedia app. Yeah, so all of your scan reports are also available in one centralized location. So all of that is also available in our manual test report section. Yep. Great. I think I will put a pause on the demo now. I think we'll probably go back to the presentation. Yeah. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. All right, with that, we've reached the end of the presentation. Thank you, Jared and Apoor, for insightful advice and practical tips. We covered a lot of ground today, from understanding the essentials of ADA and WCAG to exploring the challenges and the solutions for building accessible digital products.